That was everything I had left in the world the morning I bought that barn. Not a house, not land worth farming. A leaning, half-rotted barn on a dead man's forgotten quarter section, sold to me by an auctioneer who couldn't hide his pity when he took my money. Folks in town laughed, said I'd bought myself a coffin with a roof. But here's the thing they didn't know, the thing I didn't know either, not yet. Somebody was living inside that barn. And what I found behind those broken boards changed the shape of my whole life. It cost me more than money. It cost me the one thing I'd spent 40 years telling myself I'd never give away again. My name is Amos Kettle. I keep a ledger of every debt I've ever owed and every debt owed to me, been doing it since I was 19, when a man walked off with my wages and my trust in the same afternoon. Every kindness, every cruelty, I write it down, balances it out, keeps a man from being a fool twice. But some debts I learned that winter you can't ever square. Some you just carry. The auctioneer counted my money twice before he believed it. I stood there in the cold with my hat in my hands, watching his thumb lick across the bills, a 10, a 5, both of them soft as old cloth from riding folded in my boot, and I could see him deciding whether to feel sorry for me or just take the sale and be done. He decided on both. That's the kind of man he was. Both at once. "You know what you're buying, Kettle," he said. He had a wet way of talking, all his words coming out like they'd been soaked first. "That's the Purdy place, or what's left of the Purdy place. House burned 2 winters back. All that's standing is the barn, and that barn's got a lien on it a drunk man could sympathize with." "I know what I'm buying," I said. I didn't. Not really. But a man doesn't stand in front of half the town admitting he's spending his last coin on a wreck because he's got no better idea in his head. So I said it like I meant it, and I took the paper he handed me, and I folded it into the same boot the money had come out of, because that boot had a hole in the lining and things stayed hid in there. That was the 4th of December. I remember because I wrote it in the ledger that night. Deck 4 paid $15, $1 barn Purdy quarter. Owed to me, nothing. I owe nobody, even. Even? I liked that word back then. I thought being even with the world was the same thing as being safe in it. The ride out took the better part of a day. My horse, an old buckskin mare named Considerable, on account of she was considerable trouble and considerable stubborn, and if I'm honest, considerable dear to me, picked her way down through the arroyos slow, like she disapproved of the whole errand. Maybe she did. She'd carried me through better country than this. The Purdy place sat at the far end of a valley, the color of a bruise. Everything out there had gone the brown of a thing that used to be green. There'd been no real rain since August, and the creek that should have run silver at the valley's bottom was just a scar of cracked mud with a thread of water in the middle you could have stepped over without wetting your boot. Cattle bones here and there. Somebody's dream, dead and picked clean. And the barn. Lord, that barn. It stood the way an old man stands who's been leaning on the same cane so long the cane's grown into his hand. Whole thing tilted west. The big doors hung crooked, one of them off its top hinge so it gaped a foot at the corner. Half the shingles gone. Boards sprung loose down the north side, silver gray and warped, showing black gaps into the dark inside. Somewhere up in the loft, a length of loose tin banged in the wind, bang and quiet, and bang again, like the place had a slow heartbeat and didn't much want to keep it going. I sat there on Considerable a long while just looking. The sun was already going orange behind the far ridge. My breath smoked. And I thought, and I'll admit this because it's true, I thought, "Amos, you damned fool. You've bought a place to freeze to death in." But it was mine. First thing I'd ever owned that had a roof. And a man clings to that. He clings to it harder when it's ugly. I clicked my tongue and Considerable carried me down the last of the slope. And that's when she stopped. Just stopped, ears up, tail switching. I've had that mare 11 years. I know her stops. There's the stop she does for a rattler, quick and sideways. There's the stop she does for a smell she doesn't like, all knows. And there's a third stop, the one she was doing then, head high, weight back, one ear swiveling toward the barn and holding there. That's the stop she does for people. Easy, I told her low, easy girl. The wind had died a moment, and in that dead quiet I heard it too. A cough. Small, muffled, coming from inside the barn. The kind of cough that gets swallowed halfway, the way you'd cough if you were trying not to be heard and couldn't quite manage it, that little strangled hitch at the end of it where a hand claps over a mouth. A child's cough. I felt the hair go up on my arms under 3 layers of wool. Now, a smarter man might have turned his horse around right there. Might have decided that whatever was living in his new barn could keep on living there, and rode back to town, and slept in the livery, and dealt with it in daylight with a rifle and a couple of men from the saloon. That would have been the sensible play. That's what my ledger-keeping self would have counseled: unknown quantity, potential debt, withdraw and reassess. But I've never been as smart as I've been curious. That's been the ruin of me my whole life, and I've made a kind of peace with it. I got down off the mare. Slow. My knees cracked, they crack now, they didn't used to, and it's a thing that reminds me most mornings that I'm not the young fool I was, only the old one. I looped considerable's rein over a fence post that was half fallen but held, and I slid my hand back toward the rifle in the saddle scabbard. And then I stopped. Because that cough, it wasn't a threat. You can hear a threat, and that wasn't one. That was a small thing in the dark, trying to be quiet and failing because it was sick. I left the rifle where it was. I don't know to this day why I did that. I've turned it over 100 times. Maybe because I'd been the small thing in the dark once, a long time back, and nobody had thought to come easy toward me. Maybe I just wanted, for once in my no-account life, to be the kind of man who came toward a frightened sound with his hands open instead of full. I left the rifle, and I walked up to the gap in the big doors, and I put my hand flat against the cold gray wood, and I said, quiet as I could and still be heard, "Nobody's got to be scared. I'm not going to hurt anything in here." The barn didn't answer, but the cough stopped, cut clean. Somebody in there had gone dead still, holding it, holding their whole self. And that silence told me more than any shout could have, because you don't hold that still for a stranger unless you've learned hard what strangers can do. I pushed the door. It fought me, swollen, dragging its bottom edge across a fan of dirt worn into the floor, and then it gave with a long groan, and cold barndark opened up in front of me, and the last of the day came in slantwise over my shoulder and lay down in a gold bar across the straw. I want to tell you what a barn like that smells like when it stood empty, only it wasn't empty and it didn't smell empty. Empty smells like dust and old dry manure and the mineral cold of packed earth. This smelled like all that, and under it wood smoke, faint, banked down and careful, and under that something else, sickness. That thin, sweet, sour smell of a fever working in a small body. I'd smelled it before. Every man who's lived long enough has smelled it before, and every man dreads it, because it's the smell of a thing you mostly can't fight. My eyes came up slow to the dark. The stalls down the left side had all half collapsed. The loft above hung with its floor sagging, straw spilling through the gaps like the whole ceiling was slowly bleeding hay. And back in the far corner, where 2 walls still met square and true and made the only real shelter left in the whole leaning ruin, somebody had made a nest. A little wall of stacked crates and a fallen door, a bed of straw and what looked like a wool blanket gone the color of dirt. The banked coals of a tiny fire in a pit ringed careful with river stones. Careful. That word kept coming to me. Everything about it careful. A person who knew fire could burn a barn down around their ears and had made sure it wouldn't. And in that nest, backed all the way into the corner, a woman. She was on her knees. She had a child, small, maybe 5, maybe 6, hard to tell, pushed behind her into the angle of the wall, one arm thrown back to keep the child there. and in her other hand she held a knife. Not a big knife. A little belt knife, worn thin at the edge from sharpening. Her hand didn't shake. That's the thing I noticed, standing there in that gold bar of dying light with my heart going like a drum. Her hand did not shake. She held that knife, the way you hold a thing you have already decided completely that you are willing to use. She was Apache. I knew it the way you know weather. Dark hair pulled back and tied with a strip of red cloth gone ragged, a calico blouse, a long skirt, both of them worn past mending and patched with whatever had come to hand. High moccasin boots to the knee. Her face, I'll not forget her face. Not young, not old. A face that had been out in the world and had learned the world and had stopped expecting the world to be kind. She looked at me with black eyes that did not blink, and in those eyes was no fear at all, only calculation, only the flat cold arithmetic of a creature working out how much it will cost her to survive the next minute. The child behind her coughed again. Couldn't help it, and I watched her flinch not away from me, but for the child, a whole body wince of a mother who knows that sound is the sound that gets them both killed and can't stop it and hates that she can't. I stood very still. I took my hat off. I don't know why it felt like the thing. "Ma'am," I said. It sounded so stupid the second it left my mouth. Ma'am. Like we were passing on a boardwalk in town. Like I hadn't just walked in on a woman prepared to gut me across the body of her sick child in a barn I'd bought that morning for the last money on God's earth. But she blinked. Once. Just once. Something moved behind those flat black eyes, surprise maybe, that the white man in the doorway had taken off his hat. Small thing, smallest thing in the world. And I've come to believe that's what saved all three of us, that first minute. Not anything I said. Just a man remembering his manners with a knife pointed at his belly. "I bought this place," I said, slow, keeping my hands where she could see them, open, hat in one, the other loose at my side. "This morning, in town. I didn't know anybody was here. I heard the young one and I ran out of words, started over. I'm not the law, I'm not a bounty man. I'm just a broke old cowboy who bought himself a fallen-down barn and got a good deal more than he paid for." She didn't understand all of it. I could see that. English came to her in pieces. I'd learn later it came and went for her like a radio signal in the mountains, strong then gone. But she understood enough. She understood, bought this place, and I watched that land on her, watched her do the sum. This is his now, this is his ground, we are on his ground, and a man defends his ground. The knife came up an inch. "No," I said quick. "No, listen to me. And here's where I did the thing I still can't rightly explain. I went down. Slow, careful, both hands out. I got down on one knee in the straw, right there in the doorway, so I wasn't standing over her anymore, so I was down at the level of her and the child, so the light fell on my face and she could see it plain. A man does not kneel to attack. Even an animal knows that. And she was no animal. She was smarter than I was. But the body knows a thing before the mind talks it over. "I'm not going to take anything from you," I said. "There's nothing here worth taking. It's cold and it's falling down and half the roof's gone, and the fool who owns it is kneeling in the dirt in front of you, so you can see he means it. I'm not going to take anything." The child coughed, and coughed, and this time it didn't stop, it turned into a fit. A wet tearing thing that doubled the little body over, and the woman's whole face broke. Just for a second, just for a heartbeat, the arithmetic cracked, and under it was pure terror. A mother's terror, the oldest terror there is, and she turned her head to the child, and in turning she took her eyes off me. Off me, with a knife in her hand, and a stranger 3 steps away. She took her eyes off me to see to her sick child. And I'll tell you, I have thought about that moment more than I have thought about any moment in my life. Because that's the whole of it right there. That's a person telling you exactly who they are, whether they mean to or not. She would rather have died than lose that child. She'd calculated everything, every angle, every escape. But the second the coughing got bad, all the calculation went out of her, and she was just a mother, and I could have done anything to her in that gap. I didn't do anything. I stayed on my knee. I let her tend the child. And when she looked back at me, quick, sharp, ashamed of the lapse, I hadn't moved an inch, and I think that told her more than anything I could have said. We looked at each other across that little dying fire for a long, long time. Then slow she lowered the knife, not all the way, but down to her side. "Your boy's sick," I said. She said something back, not English, a few words in her own tongue, low, and then she saw I didn't follow, and she pressed her lips together and tried, hunting for it. "Girl," she said, rough, like the English hurt her mouth. "My girl sick here." She touched her own chest, flat-handed, over the lungs. "Bad water, cold, many days." A girl. I looked past the mother's shoulder, and I could see her now, huge dark eyes in a small drawn face, watching me with a curiosity too big for how sick she was. The way children will watch a strange thing even when they're dying, because the world's still new enough to be worth watching. She had a little carved wooden horse clutched to her chest. Someone had made it for her, whittled it careful. It was rubbed shiny in places from being held. That horse just about finished me. I don't know why. It was the careful of it again. Somebody in that woman's life had loved that child enough to sit in the cold and carve a horse out of scrap wood, and now here they were, the two of them, run to ground in a stranger's barn at the tail end of the year with a fever burning the child down. I put my hat back on. I stood up slow, hands still out, telling her every move before I made it. "I'm going to go to my saddlebag," I said. "Outside, to my horse. I've got some things. Coffee. A little flour. Some coffee'll do the girl no good, but there's honey. I've got a little honey, and hot water, and honey's better than nothing for a cough. And there's a wool blanket that's dry, which is more than that one is." I nodded at the dirt-colored blanket around the child's shoulders. "I'm going to go get those things, and I'm going to come back, and that's all. You keep the knife. You keep it right where it is, but I'm coming back." She stared at me. And then, and this is the part I wrote in the ledger that night, the part I read over and over for weeks after, she said one word. "Why?" Just that, why. Her English gone all the way down to its bones. Why would you do this? Why would a white man kneel in the dirt and give away his food to an Apache woman and her sick child, in a country where there was money, real money, folding money, the kind I did not have and badly needed, for turning that same woman and child in? Why? And I didn't have an answer. That's the truth. I'd have to make one up if I told you I did. I stood there in the doorway of my $15 barn with the last light going purple behind me, and I looked at that woman who'd take a knife across her own throat before she'd let harm come to her girl. And I thought about my ledger, my whole life of it, every debt owed and owing, every column balanced, 40 years of making sure I never gave more than I got so I'd never be the fool again. Even, I've been so proud of even. And I understood, standing there, that even is just another word for empty. "I don't know," I told her, honest. It was the most honest thing I'd said to another living soul in years. "I don't rightly know why. But I'm going to do it anyway." I turned around and I walked out to my horse. The cold hit me full in the face, and I stood a second with my hand on Considerable's warm neck, breathing, my heart still going. And I looked up at that first hard star coming out over the bruised valley, and I want to tell you I felt like a good man. I didn't. I felt scared. Scared of what I was stepping into. Because I'm not a stupid man, whatever else I am. And I already knew, that a woman doesn't hide in a barn with a knife and a sick child unless somebody is looking for her. And if somebody was looking for her, then buying that barn hadn't made me an owner. It had made me a witness. I dug the honey and the flour and the dry blanket out of my saddlebag with hands that weren't quite steady, and Considerable turned her head and looked at me with one big dark eye, the way she does when she thinks I'm about to do something considerable foolish. "I know," I told her, "I know, girl." And I carried it all back inside. The first night I didn't sleep. I told myself it was the cold, and the cold was real enough. That barn breathed frost, and the wind came through the north wall like it had a grudge, but that wasn't why. I lay on my side of the fire with my hat over my face and my hand not far from my rifle, and I listened to a stranger's child fight for every breath, and a man can't sleep through that. I don't care how tired he is. I don't care how many hard things he's seen. The sound of a small body working that hard to keep living gets in under everything. Her name was Nayeli. The woman told me that sometime past midnight, unasked, in the flat voice of a person who has decided a thing and won't take it back, that if I was going to sit up feeding her fire and boiling her water, I might as well know the name of who I was doing it for. Nayeli, she said, and touched the child's dark hair, and then she touched her own chest and said, Salah. I couldn't say it right. I tried and I got it wrong, and the child, Nayeli, laughed. Sick as she was, wrung out as she was, she laughed at the old white man mangling her mother's name. One short, bright breath of a laugh that turned straight into coughing. But she laughed first. I hung on to that. I'd got the honey into her by then. Hot water, a good spoon of honey stirred down, blown cool, and Sa'a held the tin cup to the girl's mouth and made her sip it slow. The coughing eased after. Not gone, but eased the way a fire eases when you've kept the worst of the wind off it. And Sa'a looked at me across the child's head with something in her face that wasn't trust yet. I want to be honest. It wasn't trust. Trust takes longer than a night. But it was the first crack in the wall where trust might someday get a foothold. I put it in the ledger later by firelight, when she'd finally let her own eyes close. Deck 4 night, owed to me, nothing. What I gave, honey, flour, one blanket, one night's fire. What I got, a child laughed. Cannot balance this column, do not know how. I sat looking at that a long time. My whole life I've been able to balance the column. 40 years, a man does you a wrong, you write it, you carry it. Someday you square it and cross it out. A man does you a kindness, same thing, you owe, you carry, you pay it back and you're clean. Even, clear. That's how I'd kept myself whole after the world had cut me open young. But there was no squaring a child's laugh. It didn't go in any column. It just sat there in the middle of the page like a thing that had wandered in from a different kind of book entirely, one I didn't know how to keep. I closed the ledger, and I stayed up and I fed the fire, and toward the gray end of the night, when the frost was thickest and the girl was finally sleeping deep, Sa'a told me the rest of it. She told it in pieces. English where she had it, her own tongue where she didn't, and her hands filling the gaps between, and I found to my own surprise that I followed more than I'd have thought. Grief doesn't need much grammar. It comes across. There'd been a place. Up north and west, in the high broken country, a rancheria. I gathered it was a scatter of families more than any real town. Folks who'd slipped the edges of the reservation because the reservation was killing them slow with bad flour and worse water, and men who counted heads for a living. Sa'a's people had made a kind of life up there. Thin, but a life. Her man, she didn't say much about him, and the not saying said plenty. Her man had made the wooden horse. That was as much as she'd tell me about him, and the way her face closed when the horse came into it, I didn't ask more. Some debts you can see a person carrying without needing the amount. Then the soldiers came. Not for them, exactly, for somebody else. Some band that had jumped an agency somewhere and put the whole territory on a hair trigger. But the soldiers weren't particular. A frightened army is not a careful army. I've seen enough of the world to know that much is true of every army there's ever been. They came through the high country burning what they found, and it didn't matter overmuch to them whose it was. Sa'a had run with her girl. Others had run other ways. She didn't know where. She said that part flat, no tears, and the flatness of it was worse than any weeping. I do not know where they are. A woman saying that about everyone she'd ever loved in a language not her own to a stranger in the dark. She'd been running south and east ever since. 3 weeks, moving nights, hiding days, trying to make the border country where she'd heard maybe true, maybe not, the kind of thing desperate people hear, that a body could cross over into Mexico and the soldiers wouldn't follow. and the girl had drunk from a bad creek somewhere back along the way, or breathed too many cold nights, or both, and gone down sick. And Salah had found the purty barn empty and falling, and had gone to ground in it because she could go no farther with a fevered child, and had been there 4 days when a broke old cowboy rode down the slope and bought the roof over her head for $15. "They are looking," she said. She meant the soldiers. She said it looking straight at me, making sure I understood, giving me my chance to know exactly what I'd walked into. "Men are looking." For she made a small gesture that took in herself, the child, all of it. "For any. They pay money, for any they bring back." There it was, just like I'd known outside by the horse. Somebody was looking, and there was money in it. "How much?" I heard myself ask. And then hated myself, because it was the ledger asking, the old careful part of me needing the figure. And it was a filthy thing to ask, and I knew it the second it was out. But Sa'a didn't flinch. She'd expected it, I think. She'd been waiting for it. A woman on the run learns that every stranger is doing the sum, and the only question is whether they let her see them do it. "Enough," she said quietly, "to buy many barns." And she watched my face while I heard that. I want to tell you I never once felt the pull. I'd be lying. I had $15 less than nothing to my name. I had a barn and a mare and a rifle, and the clothes on me, and that was the whole estate of Amos Kettle. And here was a woman telling me straight that there was real money, buy a ranch money, standing on my own feet again money, sitting right there in the straw in front of me, and all I had to do to collect it was be the kind of man I'd spent a lifetime carefully being. Even. Clear. Owing nobody, owed by nobody, looking out for Amos first because God knew nobody else ever had. I felt it. I'm not proud of it. I felt the whole shape of that other life in about 1 second, warm and full and safe, and I felt how easy it would be, and how the world would even call me sensible for it, and how not one soul in that town would think a hair less of me. And then I looked at the wooden horse, sticking up out of the blanket where the sleeping child clutched it, rubbed shiny by a small hand, carved careful by a man who was maybe dead now in a burned-out camp in the high country. And the pull just went, like water off a slope. It went, and it left me feeling scraped and clean and terribly, terribly clear. "Nobody's coming for you tonight," I said. "You sleep, I'll watch the road." Sa'a looked at me a while longer. Then she lay down curled around her daughter, the knife still in her hand. She never once, in all the time I knew her, let go of that knife when she slept, and she closed her eyes. And I sat up and watched a road that nobody came down, and somewhere before dawn I understood that I'd made a decision without ever deciding it, and that there was no unmaking it now, and that whatever this cost me, and I felt bone certain, that it was going to cost me, I was going to pay it. I just didn't know yet what the price would be. A man never does. That's the mercy of it and the cruelty both. 3 days the girl held even. Then on the 4th she got worse. It came on fast the way it does with the little ones. She'd been sitting up that morning, even played a bit, walked the wooden horse along the top of a crate, murmuring to it in her own tongue. A whole small story I couldn't follow but could tell was about the horse being brave. And by afternoon the fever had her again, higher than before, and she'd gone somewhere behind her eyes where we couldn't reach her. She talked to people who weren't there. She called a name, over and over, a man's name I think, and every time she called it Sa'a's face did a thing I can't describe and won't try to. I'd seen fever like that before, on a trail drive years back, a young hand no older than 16. We'd watched him burn for 2 days, and then we'd buried him under a cairn of river rock and gone on, because cattle don't wait, and I'd told myself for years that there was nothing to be done, that some things just take who they take. But I was older now, and I'd sat up 3 nights with this child, and I found I could not tell myself that anymore. "She needs more than honey," I said. "She needs a doctor, medicine, real medicine." Sa'a looked at me like I'd said the moon needed fetching down. "No doctor," she said. "A doctor is a town. A town is," She didn't finish. She didn't have to. A town was men who'd do the sum and come to the other answer. A town was the end of the running. There's a man, I said slowly, working it out even as I said it. Not a real doctor. A horse doctor more like, but he's got medicine and he's got sense and he's a long way out of town on the North Road and he owes me. He owes me. There it was, my whole life system finally good for something. Eli Thorne owed me. 2 years back I'd pulled him and his wagon out of a flooded ford when a smarter man would have let the river have him, and I'd written it in the ledger, Thorne owes me. 1 life unpaid, and I'd never once thought I'd call it in. But there it was, a debt, a real one. The kind you can square. He owes me, I said again. I can ride up there tonight, get medicine, be back by morning. He won't ask. And even if he did, he owes me enough not to say a word to anybody. It is far. 6 hours hard riding. Considerable can do it. Sa looked down at her daughter, burning in the straw, calling for her father. And I watched her do the hardest arithmetic of her life, because sending me off meant being alone in the barn, undefended, for 12 hours or more, and it meant trusting that the man who rode off would ride back, and it meant that if I was lying, if the ledger-cold part of me had won after all, she'd handed me my chance to bring the soldiers down on her while she waited helpless in the dark. She had every reason to say no. She said go. Just that. And she looked at me, and there was the trust, finally, arrived. Not because she was sure of me, but because she had run out of every other road, and sometimes that's the only door trust ever walks through. Trust isn't always a warm thing. Sometimes it's just a person out of choices, betting the last thing they've got on the least worst stranger. I'll take it. I've come to think that kind of trust is the truest kind there is, because it costs the most to give. I saddled considerable in the dark, and as I was cinching her, Sa came out, knife in her belt, leaving the sick child alone for the length of 1 minute, which for her was leaving her alone forever, and she pressed something into my hand. The wooden horse. So you come back, she said. I didn't understand at first. Then I did, and it near about broke me. She wasn't giving me a keepsake. She was giving me the one thing on this earth her daughter loved, the one thing the girl would cry for the second she surfaced from the fever. She was giving me a reason. Making sure that even if the cold part of me won on the North Road, even if I thought about riding on and never coming back, there'd be this small shameful weight in my saddlebag, this carved horse a dead man made, pulling me back toward the barn. She'd found my ledger without ever seeing it. She'd found the exact shape of the man I was afraid of being, and she'd stopped up the hole in advance. I'll bring it back, I said, and my voice wasn't steady. I'll bring it back, and I'll bring the medicine, and I'll bring it all back to her. You hear me? I'm coming back. I hear you, Sa said. And I rode. I'll not spend long on the ride. 6 hours in the black cold, Considerable's breath and mine the only warm things in a frozen country, the wooden horse riding in my coat against my chest where I could feel it. I thought about a great many things on that ride. I thought about the young hand we'd buried under the river rock, and how I'd told myself for 20 years there was nothing to be done, and how that had been the kind of lie a man tells so he can keep going. I thought about my own father, who'd been a hard man, and had made me a hard boy, and how the whole of my ledger-keeping was really just a wall I'd built when I was 19, and a man walked off with my wages, a wall to keep from ever again being the fool who trusted and got emptied out. And I thought the wall kept the world out, sure enough, but it kept me in. 40 years, even and clear and safe, and so damned alone, I'd bought a falling-down barn just to have one thing that was mine. Eli Thorne came to the door with a lamp and a scatter gun, and when he saw it was me, he set the gun down and didn't ask a single question, which is the whole reason I'd trusted him. I told him a child was sick, lungs, high fever, and he went into his back room and came out with a paper twist of powder and a small brown bottle and a plug of something that smelled of camphor, and he told me the how and the how much twice, until he was sure I had it. And when I reached to settle up, he put his hand flat on my chest and pushed the money back. I'd have had to borrow it anyhow, and he said, "We're square now, Amos. You pulled me out of that river. This makes us square." Square, the word I'd waited 2 years to hear. The debt crossed out, clean. And I stood there in Eli Thorne's doorway with the medicine in my hand, and I felt nothing. Not the old satisfaction. Nothing. Because I finally understood that I'd had it backwards my whole life. Being square with a man isn't the end of something good. It's the end of a connection. Every crossed-out line in my ledger was a person I no longer had any reason to see. I'd spent 40 years working my way toward being connected to nobody and calling it freedom. I didn't want to be square anymore. God help me, at 50-some years old, freezing in a horse doctor's doorway, I finally understood I'd rather owe somebody something. I'd rather be tangled up. I'd rather carry a debt I could never pay than be clean and clear and alone. "Thank you, Eli," I said, and I meant it in a way I'd never meant anything. Then I got back on my mare and I rode south into the dark, toward a barn I owned, and a woman I'd known 4 days and a child who wasn't mine, carrying medicine and a wooden horse, faster than I'd ridden in years. Because for the first time in a long time, there was somebody at the other end of the ride waiting, who'd know if I didn't come. The sun was coming up gray and hard over the bruised valley when I saw the barn again, leaning into the west like a tired old man. And I saw the horses in front of it. Not mine, not Considerable's kin, cavalry horses, 4 of them. Saddled, standing hipshot at the fallen fence, breathing smoke into the cold morning. The soldiers had found the barn. And I was still a quarter-mile out, on open ground, with the medicine in my coat and the wooden horse against my heart, watching 4 blue-coated men stand between me and the only thing in the world I'd decided to save. I should have run. That's what the cold part of me said, the old ledger-keeper, calm as ever. Even then, 4 armed men, 1 old cowboy, no play here, ride south and live. Nobody knew I had anything to do with that barn. The bill of sale was folded in my boot, sure, but a man can lose a paper. I could turn Considerable and be gone into the arroyos before they ever marked me, and by nightfall I'd be 40 miles off, medicine still in my coat, and no soul on earth would ever call me a coward because no soul on earth would ever know. I sat my horse on that open ground, and I felt the whole shape of that escape, warm and complete, the way I'd felt the bounty money 3 nights back. And then I heard, thin across the frozen quarter-mile, a child cough. Nay, Ellie, alive, awake enough to cough, which meant Sa was in there with 4 soldiers and a fevered girl and a little worn belt knife, doing the last arithmetic she'd ever do. I didn't decide to ride toward them. My hands decided. Considerable was moving before I'd finished thinking, and I want to be truthful with you, it wasn't courage. I've heard men talk about courage like it's a thing you reach for. It's not. Courage is just what's left when you find out you'd rather die doing a thing than live having not done it. I'd have been sick every day of whatever life I bought by running. I knew that the way you know your own name, so I rode in. I came down on them at a walk, hands high and open, calling out before I was close enough to spook anybody into shooting. "Hello, the barn. Hello. I'm the owner here. I own this ground. Hold up now, hold up." 4 faces turned. Young faces, most of them. That's the thing folks forget about soldiers, how young. Cold and tired and a long way from anywhere warm. Their sergeant was older, a slab-faced man with frost in his mustache and eyes that had done a great deal of this particular work and stopped feeling much about it. He had Sa by the upper arm. She wasn't fighting. She'd gone still and flat and calculating, the way she'd been that first evening, and behind her in the corner nest I could see the small shape of the girl, and I could see 1 soldier standing over the child not knowing what in God's name to do with his own hands. "This here your place," the sergeant said. "Bought it 4 days back, $15 from Holly's the auctioneer, and he'll swear to it." I got down slow, kept my hands where they lived. "What's the trouble?" "No trouble." Found a squaw and a young one holed up in your barn. He said squaw the way you'd flick something off your sleeve. There's a bounty out. We'll take 'em off your hands. You'll likely get a cut, being the owner, for the reporting of it. A cut. There it was, one more time, the world handing me the sensible answer, money and clean hands, and everybody nodding that Amos Kettle had done exactly right. I looked at Sarah, she was looking at me. And I need you to understand what was in her face, because it wasn't pleading. She didn't beg me with her eyes. That wasn't in her. What was in her face was worse, it was understanding. She thought she knew what I was going to do. She'd known all along it would come to this, one way or another, and she'd let herself take my honey and my fire and my night ride anyway, because a drowning person takes the rope even when they think it's rotten. And now the moment was here, and she was watching me choose the money, already forgiving me for it, already folding it into the long tally of what the world had taken. And that flat expectation that of course I'd fail her, that's what undid the last knot in me. I'd spent my whole life making sure nobody could empty me out again. And I understood, standing in the cold with the wooden horse against my heart, that the only way to stop being that hollow, careful man was to let myself be emptied out on purpose, to give the thing away, all of it. On purpose, with my eyes open, for somebody who couldn't pay it back. "Sergeant," I said, "that's my wife's sister." The words came out of me from somewhere I didn't know I had. The whole barn went quiet, even the wind seemed to hold. "Come again," the sergeant said. My wife's sister and my wife's sister's girl. I was building it as I went, fast, the way you build a fire in the rain, feeding it whatever'll catch. My wife passed 2 winters back, Rosa. She was a Mexican woman from down south of the line. This here's her kin, come up looking for family after their people got scattered, and I've been expecting them near a month. I turned to Sila, and I made my voice go soft the way a man's does for family. "I told you to wait at the crossing, not come clear out here. You near gave me a heart attack, girl, riding off from town like that." I was betting my whole life on one thing, that a tired sergeant a long way from anywhere did not want the paperwork of arresting a landowning white man's Mexican in-laws, that the money wasn't worth the trouble if the trouble might come back on him. "She don't look Mexican to me," the sergeant said, but something had shifted, doubt just a hair of it. "She's half. Her mother was Sonora Apache. It's all one people down there, Sergeant. The line don't mean much to blood. You want to be the man who dragged a citizen's grieving in-laws to the fort and had a lawyer waiting." I made myself laugh, easy, a man among men. "Hell, I bought this whole quarter section legal, papers in my boot, I'll show you. You think I'd buy ground to hide fugitives on? I'm too broke and too old for that kind of excitement." Now the girl chose that moment. Fever blind, half in a dream, she surfaced enough to see her mother held by a strange man, and she did the thing children do. She reached out one thin arm and cried a word, and it wasn't English and it wasn't Spanish, and every soldier in that barn heard plain what she was. The sergeant's eyes came back to me, hard. And I did the only thing left. I walked, slow, hands open, over to the child, and I knelt down in the straw beside her, and I took the wooden horse out of my coat, and I put it in her hand and closed her small fingers around it. "There now," I said to her, gentle, the way you talk to any sick child anywhere. "There now, Mija, Tio's here. I brought your horse back, see, I told you I'd bring him back." "Tio, uncle." I said it in the Spanish I'd learned off Rosa, off a real woman I'd really loved and really buried, the one true thing under the whole invented story. And the girl's fevered eyes found the horse and found me, and some animal deep part of her that was past all language knew a safe voice from a dangerous one, and she quieted. She curled around that wooden horse and she quieted, and she said, small, Tio, back to me. Because a sick child will take an uncle from anyone offering, and because I'd said it true. The barn was dead silent. The sergeant looked at the old white man kneeling in the straw calling an Apache child his niece in Spanish, and he looked at his cold young soldiers, and he looked at the long ride back to the fort and the lawyer that might be waiting, and I watched him weigh it all and find it, at last, not worth the candle. "Let her go, Miller," he said. He let go of Sa's arm. "You keep your kin off the open country, mister," he told me, hard, saving his face. "There's real hostiles moving. Somebody's liable to shoot first and never ask." "I'll keep 'em close," I said. "You have my word." They mounted up. It took 100 years. I knelt in the straw with my hand on the girl's hot forehead, and I did not look at Sa, and she did not look at me, because we both knew that one glance wrong would tell the whole lie, and we held that stillness between us like two people carrying water in cupped hands. And then the 4 horses were moving off up the slope, blue coats against the gray morning, smaller and gone. And still we didn't move, not for a long time, not until the last drum of hooves had died all the way out of the frozen air. Then Sa crossed the barn and dropped to her knees beside her daughter, and she put her face down into the child's hair, and her shoulders shook, and she did not make one single sound. Not one. A woman who'd learned that even grief has to be silent when men are hunting you. She wept without a sound, and I turned away to give her the only privacy that barn could offer, and I busied my shaking hands with the medicine, mixing Eli Thorne's powder into hot water the way he'd told me twice, because it was a thing to do, and because if I'd stopped doing things I'd have wept too. The girl lived. I'd like to tell it slower, make more of it, but the truth of it was quiet and undramatic the way real deliverance usually is. The fever broke on the 3rd night after the medicine. She woke clear-eyed and starving and cross, which Eli Thorne had told me was the best sign there is. A sick child that's turned mean is a child that's decided to live. She ate half of everything I had and complained through her mother that my coffee was terrible, which it was. And she made me hold the wooden horse and gallop it along the crate while she directed the story, and got frustrated with me because I wasn't doing the voices right. And Sa watched us both with a look I won't try to name, because naming it would make it smaller than it was. They stayed the winter. There was no moving a healing child through that cold, and by the time spring came and the passes opened south, something had happened that none of us said out loud. The barn had stopped being a place they were hiding and become a place they were living. I patched the north wall. Sa fixed the door so it hung true, better than I ever could have. Her hands could do anything. The girl named my mare, in her own tongue, a name that meant something like grumpy grandmother, which fit considerable so well I use it to this day. I kept the ledger all that winter, but it changed. I stopped keeping columns. I just wrote down the days. Sa showed me how her people bank a fire to last till morning. Girl laughed so hard at the coffee she fell off the crate. Cold snap, all 3 of us slept close for the warmth, and I was not ashamed. Things that didn't balance, things that didn't need to. In the spring they left. We'd both always known they would. The border country was still where her people might be, some of them, the scattered ones, if any had lived, and a woman doesn't stop looking for her family because a stranger's barn got warm. I understood. God helped me. I even helped her plan the route, and I gave her considerable, because a woman and a child crossing that country needed a horse worth more than $15, and because I found, when it came to it, that I wanted her to have the one thing of mine she'd first been afraid of. The morning they went, the girl gave me the wooden horse, pressed it into my hand the exact way her mother had, that night by the fence, and closed my old fingers around it, and said, in careful English she'd made me teach her all winter, "So you remember." I couldn't speak. I'll not pretend I could. Sa stood a moment in the door she'd fixed, in the gray light, with her daughter up on my mare and the whole hard country waiting. She looked at me. And she said the same word she'd said the very first night, the one that had no answer. "Why?" she said, but it wasn't a question this time. This time it was a thing she already knew the answer to, and was only saying so that I'd know she knew. "I don't rightly know," I told her, same as before, "but I'm glad I did." She almost smiled. It was the closest I ever saw her come. Then she turned my mare south, and she rode down through the bruised valley that was going green now at last, the girl waving the whole way with her free hand, smaller and smaller against the morning, until the arroyo took them and they were gone. I still keep the barn. Fixed it up over the years, it doesn't lean anymore, which I'll admit I have mixed feelings about, an old man growing straighter than the building he lives in. I keep the wooden horse on the shelf above where the fire used to be. I don't know if they made it south. I don't know if Sa found any of her people, or if the girl grew up, or if that mean bright child who fell off the crate laughing is an old woman now somewhere across the line, telling her own grandchildren about a winter she spent in a broke cowboy's barn. I've made my peace with not knowing. Some accounts don't close. That's not a failure of the bookkeeping. That's the whole point of it, I think, that I was 50 years old before I learned. Folks in town still tell the story of the fool who spent his last $15 on the Purdy barn. They tell it like a joke, mostly. Poor old Kettle bought himself a coffin with a roof. I let them tell it. They don't know what I found inside. They think they do. They think the punchline is nothing, an empty ruin, a broke man's bad bargain. And I've never once corrected them, because how would you even start? How do you tell a man at a bar that you walked into an empty barn with $15 and a heart shut up tight as a fist, and you walked out? Well, I keep the horse dusted. I talk to it some evenings, which is a thing an old man is allowed. And on the cold nights, the real hard ones, when the frost comes in the way it did that first winter, I bank the fire the way she taught me, careful, ringed round with river stones, and I leave the door unbarred. Just in case. I never told anybody that, about the door.